As president of the board of the Energy Systems Integration Group, it's my great honor to welcome you to our 2023 technical conference here. This is an amazing turnout. It's a record turnout, I think, of over 240 people this time. I'm very pleased to see that more than half of you, this is your first ESIG meeting, and that is exactly what we love to see here. We also have a large contingent that Charlie will talk about internationally coming in, because part of this, as a nonprofit convening organization, ESIG is really trying to help people share information, figure out pathways forward on which we have to coordinate and collaborate for interoperability, move things forward on decarbonization, not just of electricity, but all energy vectors on a faster pace. And for me, ESIG has always been the best place to network and do all that. So both individually and for your companies, ESIG is a membership-based organization. Certainly encourage you to have your companies, your organizations join. That makes your entire staff a member of ESIG, and then you can participate even more fully in our working groups and task forces. But I don't think there's ever been a more important time for ESIG than right now. I mean, we're seeing this huge challenge of decarbonization of the electricity grid, adding green hydrogen to it, all other energy vectors coming very quickly as well. And we've got a lot of, federal support, longer term support here in the United States that we really have to take advantage of. The goals that society is holding out for us are very wonderful, very difficult, as we know, from a technical and execution point of view. But it's places like this where we get together and just freely exchange knowledge and meet each other and really make the context that I think all of you individually will want to have to really help, contribute to this. And I really thank all of you for showing up and doing this. I think it's a very, very important time. As engineers and technology people, really we love a good challenge, right? And we got one. And it's never been important, I think, in terms of our responsibility to society as a whole for us to do this, both for North America and for the globe. So I'm very, very honored for our keynote speaker to kick us off on this. Commissioner Allison Clements was appointed to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in December of 2020, a long-term friend of ESIG and a participant in energy law and sustainable FERC project and other activities before that. She's got quite a challenge at FERC, but they're doing some great stuff, a lot to talk about. Of course, we're very enthused, I think, about some of the progress being made on transmission, on inverters, other topics that are near and dear to ESIG. So I'm going to, with no further ado, I'll let Allison get up and make some comments, and she is agreeing to take some questions and answers. So please get your Q&A ready, and we'll spend some time with Allison today, and we really appreciate her being the keynote speaker for ESIG. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you. Hi. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me to this meeting, and congratulations on such a successful event already. I'll fangirl out for a minute and just say, when I left a law, I was a lawyer in private practice, and when I left law firm life and came back to work on energy policy, I was part of a group called the Sustainable FERC Project. Some of you might know Terry Black, Ed knows Terry Black, who started that project. And I would get on the phone, and Charlie Smith would be on the phone, and Mark Ahlstrom would be on the phone, and Debbie Lou would be on the phone. And I thought, oh my God, if I could ever be like these people one day, talk with these people. It was so cool, and I was so excited that it's a real honor to come back and speak with you all in this group that is so important. And you had such vision to bring people together, someone said at lunch, out of the shine of the spotlight to really try and get at these hard problems, these real operational challenges that the transition of the electricity system, whichever direction it was going to go, would face. So congratulations to ESIG for that. And it is an honor for me to speak with you all. For those of you who don't think about the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission all day, every day, I feel sorry for you. But I'll fill you in real quickly. We're an independent commission of 5 presidentially appointed commissioners. Right now we're 4. Our chair is my democratically appointed colleague, Willie Phillips, and we're all on the commission for 5-year staggered terms. We have jurisdiction on the electricity side over wholesale rates, transmission service, the rates for transmission service and the practices affecting them. And we also, since 2005, have authority over the reliability of the bulk electricity system, among a lot of other things. So it's a big challenge that we as policymakers have to try and figure out and keep up with all the changes that you all are seeing on the system. And of course, the challenges we're facing today are as great as the opportunity. You all know better than anyone that we have extreme weather bearing down on our electricity system, weather that the system wasn't designed to withstand, scenarios that the models didn't predict, consider, and work towards. We have an evolving cyber and physical threat that is not going away and not getting any less complex. The Commission also has authority for those cybersecurity standards. We have a changing resource mix, a relatively rapidly changing resource mix, a lot of which is to get at that extreme weather, right? And to try and mitigate and adapt. And even if we didn't have any of those things, we have an old electricity system. So there's so much to do. But to me, the reason the energy transition is happening is because it's the answer to those challenges. If you take which resource is better, which is your favorite fuel source, where you come from in the industry, and you think about progress, right? And the progress that will allow the backbone of the US economy to continue to provide the US its ability to act as an international economic superpower, you have the energy transition because that is progress. And now, of course, it helps to withstand the new challenges that the system faces. Throughout modern history, regulation has been kind of keeping up with or lagging behind at different times the markets and innovation. And I think ESIG at this intersection of technology, markets, and regulation sits in a really important place. Right now, my opinion is that the regulations are lagging really far behind the place that the markets want to go. For the first time with the Inflation Reduction Act in place, perhaps, you know, the energy policy of the country is going as well. So what do we do with this fact that we have to catch these rules up to reflect reality? My approach to doing this has always been and continues to be reality-based, to be data-driven, and to try and break down each of these hard problems into less difficult tasks. I think the Commission, as a technology-neutral economic regulator, has to approach the situation that way if we want to catch these regulations back up. And what we need to do is make the lowest cost, nearest term, easiest changes, and then work our way up the system scale to the most expensive, longer term, most difficult changes to achieve. And so I'll just talk briefly about some of the things the Commission is doing from that near term, lower cost up the chain to the longer term, more expensive that this Commission at FERC is focused on. And some of you will be familiar with a lot of these. So in the near term, lowest hanging fruit, one thing we've done is start to get started on grid enhancing technologies. We are just getting started from a regulatory perspective. We've done a few things. We passed something called Order 881, which required utilities, transmission owners to use ambient adjusted ratings. Lots of people already were, but now everybody has to, right? And we've just finished compliance with that rule. We have as in the regulatory process, you have to put proposals out for comment. Sometimes then once you get the comment back, you make another proposal. We have something called a notice of inquiry that we've issued related to the potential use of dynamic line ratings for some or all transmission lines. We have not taken action, but we have gathered a lot of comment on what circumstances might make sense to then require the use of dynamic line ratings. We've done a few other things that I will get to, but that's been an important priority for me in particular. Sorry if that went off. Because it is, the numbers are staggering, right? These are major league numbers when you talk about customer savings and the opportunity to relieve congestion, to make room, whether it be for some period of time or over time on the transmission system to integrate more resources. Another thing, near-term, lower-hanging fruit is ensuring we get reliability standards right. And so we just finalized a rule, which I heard today is called Order 901. I can't verify that, I've just been told. But we are requiring NERC, the Registered Electricity Reliability Organization, of which FERC has jurisdiction over, to issue standards for performance requirements, modeling, and performance of inverter-based resources, and some ride-through requirements that go along with that. Now, there's a lot of moving pieces, I know, in your all's world related to IBRs and how they perform, how they are modeled, what kind of models get used, and what they will look like over time. The commission has now finalized one step, which will take NERC a few years to get to its own, go through its own standards development process and have a final set of reliability standards relating to IBR performance for now on the grid. So that's an important step, and you all probably know more than I do about kind of the real life impact of what that will do. I think that's an example of where you all have to teach us as policymakers about the things you need, the things that make sense, and the things that are falling incorrectly relative to what you're seeing happening in the real world. The other near-term thing we've done is issued something called Order Number 2023, which is initial reforms to generator interconnection policy. You might be familiar, there was Order 2003. That's the reigning regime of interconnection policy. And of course, as the resource mix has changed and we have twice as many megawatts of projects lined up to get onto the grid than are currently on the grid today, the system has broken down for lots of reasons. But we have, real long queues of people trying to hook up to the grid. We have processes that are shut down. And so what we did was try to create a strong baseline to look around the country and say, hey, utilities, what have you been up to on trying to get through these log jams of interconnection lines? Cluster studies, site control requirements, commercial readiness requirements. And this is something new. We've imposed penalties on transmission providers when they don't meet study deadlines. So trying to ensure that everybody has skin in the game relative to getting the interconnection system moving again, right? It's only the start. You can't do anything in regulation on these complex issues anymore and say, okay, we took care of the interconnection problem, or we took care of the transmission system planning problem. What we have done is create a strong baseline across the country for all utilities. Now, of course, other regions and utilities aren't waiting for us. Lots of them are making additional reforms. And I hope in a concurrence I issued with Order Number 2023, I hope you'll take a look at it. I've proposed a few deeper reforms that we need to be thinking about for next steps on interconnection. That includes first, aligning interconnection with anticipatory transmission system planning. As you know, what has happened is in this broken down process, the transmission system planning isn't working, and therefore the transmission planning is happening in this ill-suited interconnection process over here. We need those things to be speaking to each other, both so that the interconnection is informing the transmission and the transmission is getting done in places where it makes sense for resources to interconnect. The second thing we need to do is align in the states where it matters our interconnection processes with our resource procurement processes. That doesn't make sense in every state, but in vertically integrated states it does, and it's hard. It's hard to figure out how to do that legally while avoiding discrimination. The other thing that I focus on in my concurrence is focused interconnection. The idea that maybe we can make this less expensive up front, get more resources hooked up for interruptible service or energy-only service, and then figure out how to grow the network in a more kind of shared, optimized way if people need network service. So those are some of the things I'm thinking about. So we're started on interconnection, but we're not done. We've started on IBRs, but we're not done. We've started on grid enhancing technologies, but we're not done. And all of that is doable, right? It's a lot. The wheels of the regulatory process grind really slowly, but it's doable. So then what comes next? What's the medium term harder to do, as though that's a bit a walk in the park? Transmission system planning. The commission has put out a proposal on regional transmission system planning and cost allocation. This one is the 20-year forward scenario-based planning that says, hey, in the face of this uncertainty on the system, how do we start to harness that and figure out the kind of transmission system investment we need? And we have not taken final action on that rule, but we put the strength of the rule is in the planning part. Use best available data, do scenario-based planning. We have listed a set of benefits that should be considered. We haven't suggested that we should require them, but we're still working on the development of that final rule. So that's an exciting opportunity to say, hey, it's 2023. The last time FERC weighed in on transmission system planning was in Order 1000, 13 years ago, and it's time to take the next step. That's hard, it's big, and it will require a lot of work in real life from all of you. And then beyond that, what's the longer term? What's next? And this is really not by urgency, but by level of action that the commission has taken so far, is interregional transmission system planning and cost allocation. What are we going to do with that? We've had conversations about interregional transfer capability. Certainly, Winter Storm Uri tells the story for us, where people who were connected to regions that were connected could share power with each other until you got to the places where there was no more transfer capability. Conceptually, everybody agrees it's a good idea to interconnect regions, and the devil's in the details. What methodologies should we be using? Again, that's a place where we look to the people who understand the system operations to help us. There's a bill in Congress right now that just suggests a baseline 30% transfer capability across regions. Lots of people feel lots of different ways about that. That's not FERC's job. Over here, we have the authority to require interregional transmission system planning, whether it be specific to interregional capability or whether it be something more, even more ambitious than that in terms of national backbone opportunities. That's a lot, from the easy, near-term, low-hanging all the way up to the big, hard, expensive stuff. And it's an exciting time, and it's a time where we need to figure out how to get these rules ahead of the game instead of behind. And people like you and the work that ESIG is doing is really important to help inform those conversations for us. So I think I'll stop there and open it to conversation.
Okay, so I'm going to thank Commissioner Clements also for her comments. I didn't know she remembered me from way back then. So I'm going to give a little bit of overview of the workshop and also some reflections on what's happening out in the industry. Not going to take too much time because I don't have too much time. First, the mandatory disclaimer. We're not responsible for anything that we say here. Don't believe anything you hear. Only half of what you see. No, that one. The antitrust guidelines. We don't want any collusion. No price fixing. We don't want anybody going to jail. The non-discrimination and anti-harassment. ESIG does not tolerate either discrimination or harassment of any way, shape, or form, and it's just totally unacceptable. So we ask everybody here to be respectful of others in the room and to act appropriately in all situations here. So the workshop agenda overview, you've got the copies of the agenda. There's only a few things I want to point out. Commissioner Clements spoke about the grid forming, grid enhancing technologies, the GETS, and the next session we'll go into GETS in a little more detail and different aspects of that. Tonight there's a board meeting and dinner. Tomorrow's another full day of sessions with a networking reception tomorrow night from 6:30 to 8. And Wednesday's another full day with, we have our advisory council meeting and dinner on Wednesday night. So a busy week for all of us. And then Thursday is all of the working groups and task forces. There are members only activities. And if you're a member and you plan to participate and you haven't signed up, then you should see Ryan out at the registration desk. All of the working groups and a few of the task forces will be meeting on Thursday. Okay, so what have I seen recently? Well, you probably saw this too. This is a graph that showed up in the Washington Post, among other places, in the last couple of weeks. September shattered global heat record. So you'll see that red line for 2023. Those are the monthly average global temperatures from January through September. And you'll see a lot of gray lines down below. That's 30 years worth of data from the last 30 years, monthly average global temperatures. The September temperature, you can see September and then June, July, August, as well as September, all significantly above average, but September 0.9 degrees C warmer compared to the 30-year average was about 0.5 degrees C warmer than the highest previous September. And it was about 1.4 degrees C warmer than the pre-industrial age average temperature, which is getting close to the ICCP point of concern for the future of the planet. So these, this, I don't want to call it a trend, this data was described in some very technical language by some of the meteorologists. I've only heard language like this before from Nick Miller. Absolutely gobsmackingly bananas. Nick, take a bow, would you? Extraordinary. We've never seen a record smashed by anything close to this margin. I just wanted to point out that piece of data that caught my eye. And then this cartoon, which resembles me. You ever have that feeling, maybe if I unplug it and plug it in again, I'll fix this mess? I have that feeling every day, especially when I'm on a Zoom call and I can't get my video or my audio working. So I've showed this slide the last time from a NERC meeting last year, just about a year ago in November. There's a couple of points I want to emphasize before I go into the following slides. And it really has to do with the Inflation Reduction Act. Will upend key tenets of utility resource planning, including the need for bottom-up forecasting to account for a pending surge in electric vehicle and building load. I think that's something that people are beginning to take seriously now, recognizing the huge impact it's going to have on the system of the future. And then a quote from NextEra person: later this decade with the IRA, NextEra expects wind coupled with a 4-hour battery system will cost $14 to $21 a megawatt hour. Solar with batteries, $17 to $24 a megawatt hour. And then the quote from the Office of General Counsel at DOE: we have a once in a lifetime set of incentives that are on the table. The biggest risk for ratepayers would be a failure to capitalize on that right now. Rather strong words. So for those of you who were here at the spring meeting, I couldn't find the Lazard data for last year, and it's because Lazard didn't publish any. And the reason they didn't publish any is because they didn't know what was going on, because of the inflation, because of the supply chain disruptions, because of the increasing cost of debt. I think they just took a pass on trying to figure out what the lowest cost of energy, the least cost of energy was. But they did publish a report in April. And if you want to see the details, and there's a lot of details, it's probably a 30-page report with a lot of fine print and footnotes on all of the assumptions. It's a source of data that looks at the cost of energy across a broad range of both renewable and non-renewable options. It's not perfect, but it does compare all of the sources on a consistent basis with a consistent set of assumptions. So at least you get an apples to apples comparison between them. A couple of them that I want to point out is the solar PV utility scale. You can see the actual cost, the unsubsidized costs are in the black line, $24 to $96 a megawatt hour. You can see the subsidized costs in the blue line just below the black bar. It's the third set of data down. Third and fourth, one's comparing with the ITC, one with the PTC. You see costs that range from $0 a megawatt hour to $77 a megawatt hour. And one of the things I noticed in going through the data is that the effect of the ITC and the PTC on the solar or the wind, and whether it's with or without batteries, makes a difference. So these numbers, they're probably not indicative of or exact for any particular plant, but they're indicative for a range of plants. So take them with as indicative numbers. And then onshore wind, $24 to $75 unsubsidized, $0 to $66 megawatt hour subsidized. And then PV and storage with battery, and here's one, $31 to $68 a megawatt hour, where I think that the way the PTC or the ITC was used or not used affected that number, because there are cheaper plants out there in the subsidized world. And then the wind plus storage onshore from $12 up to $103 a megawatt hour. And the comparison, the vertical lines, the first for the gas combined cycle, I think that was at $39 a megawatt hour, and the gas peaking plants at was $119 a megawatt hour, or $115 a megawatt hour. So you can see where all the other estimates fall with respect to those two comparisons. This is the trend over the last 10 years for wind. You can see the lower end. Indeed, from 21 to 23, there's really no data point for 22 last year. There's an uptick in the average, although the least came down just a little bit. And similarly for solar, there's an uptick in the average, but the least did come down a little bit as well. And then something that's really eye-opening is the LCOE of hydrogen that they show. For two different electrolyzer types, the proton exchange membrane on the top and the alkaline cell on the bottom. It's for green hydrogen. You see the black numbers unsubsidized, 477 to 737. This is dollars per kilogram of hydrogen. And then the alkaline cell, 379 to 578 per kilogram, dollars per kilogram of hydrogen. And look at the subsidized numbers. There's a $3 a kilogram subsidy for certain conditions for hydrogen. And it actually moves the subsidized costs down for both of them outside the range of the actual costs for today. And just to give a calibration on that, the cost of green hydrogen today is about $5 a kilogram. And DOE has a hydrogen shot program similar to the PV sunshot program of a decade ago, to bring that cost down from $5 to $1 a kilogram by 2030. So think about what $1 a kilogram kind of hydrogen would look like on this chart if the DOE program is successful. Really, really kind of mind-boggling. So wind and solar are here to stay. There's about 1,000 gigawatts of wind and solar installed around the world. There's over 100 gigawatts of each in the US, and there's estimates for global installations this year of about 100 gigawatts of wind globally and about 250 to 300 gigawatts of PV. So very large growth projected for the future, and PV has outstripped wind in the estimates world. Where are we in the US? This data is from the EIA. Shows that about 20% of our energy comes from renewables today, 20% from nuclear, 20% from coal, and about 40% from natural gas. So still about 60% of our energy coming from fossil fuels. But we have a ways to go. What does the outlook look for the US for installations the next 5 years? For wind, 10 to 20 gigawatts per year over the next 5 years. For solar, something like 25 to 50 gigawatts per year over the next 5 years. See that green line? That's what the estimates were without the IRA. So that part of the bar chart above the green line is the impact of the IRA. But of course, as Commissioner Clements said, and as we know, it's going to be impacted by the availability of transmission. Looking back to 2010 compared to 22 on the left-hand side, you can see that the queue in 2010 was about half the size of the installed capacity. The installed capacity was around 1,000 gigawatts in the US. The queue was around 500 gigawatts. So 12 years later, 2022, installed capacity is around 1,250 gigawatts, but the queue is over 2,000 gigawatts. In 2010, the queue in large part was wind and solar, some gas. 2022, the queue is mostly solar, batteries, and a bit of wind, and still a very little bit of gas. And on the right-hand side, you can see for 7 of the ISOs, or the 7 ISOs, the installed capacities in the black line near the top of the gray bar, and the top of the gray bar being the amount of capacity in the queue in each of those ISOs. A few other odds and ends. VPPs are in the news. Recent study released by DOE talking about how much savings could be realized by VPPs, $10 billion, meeting 20% of the peak demand, and 2 Tesla VPPs just cleared the energy market in ERCOT, which I think is going to be an interesting thing to watch. Hydrogen, DOE last week, I think it was, awarded $7 billion for 7 hydrogen hubs. There's some concern that not all of those hydrogen hubs were for green hydrogen. Some of it was blue hydrogen. I have to see how that all plays out. And I think a little bit of competition engendered with the EU looking to hold its first green hydrogen subsidy auction in December could fetch a fixed premium subsidy of up to €4 per kilogram. So that's even greater than the $3 per kilogram of the IRA subsidy. So just a word about the ESIG opportunities opportunities to participate in ESIG activities dealing with the full range of challenges that are associated with the global power transition and system planning, system operations, DER, reliability, research and education. We've got about 18 different working groups or project teams that are going on. This is the way to get engaged for members who want to participate in some of these activities. Just get engaged with the appropriate working group and project team. There's also user groups. I think the GETS user group was mentioned as well. There's also a probabilistic forecasts and planning and operations and an O&M user group for people who are actively involved in any one of those three activities. There's user groups for those users. Some of the upcoming meetings, we've got meetings on the technical track in the Tucson next spring, Salt Lake City in the summer, and then Providence, Rhode Island, with hopefully an opportunity to see one of the offshore wind plants next fall. And just closing by noting, Mark said in the beginning, there's a lot of new people here. There's also a lot of people from overseas. There's 20 countries represented in the meeting this week, and that includes the great nation of Texas, which we always. And there's a delegation from a group that NREL has supported from Vietnam, South Africa, and India. I want to extend a warm welcome to them and our friends from really just about all the continents except Antarctica, unless there's some penguins hiding around here that I haven't seen. But really want to extend a warm welcome to all the folks from North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Australia. Everybody, I really encourage you to take the time to make some new friends. It really is a friendly bunch. There's a lot of opportunities at the breaks, the lunches, the breakfasts, and hope you all have a good time and look forward to seeing you during the rest of the week. So thank you for coming.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for sticking around. I know it's after lunch, but we are excited to talk about grid enhancing technologies. I want to thank ESIG for making this panel the opening plenary and bringing this discussion today. We do want audience participation. So if you are an ESIG participant, you'll know they use Slido. If you go to Slido, SLIDO.com and enter ESIG 23, you'll be able to enter questions as they come up. Your friends can vote for them to be discussed later. And we will have one poll. So we want some audience participation. Excited to see what y'all think about that. I'm going to kick us off to get a shared baseline understanding of what are grid enhancing technologies, who cares, and what's going on. And then each panelist will dig in a little deeper on the technologies and their applications. So I think that's all of the baseline setting I need to do. So I will jump in. First of all, non-Slido poll, can you raise your hands if you've heard of GETS before? All right, I'm going to say 50%. That's great. We define grid enhancing technologies as hardware and software that increase the transmission capacity on existing infrastructure by unlocking dynamic capabilities. The things these three technologies I'm going to talk about have in common are they're quickly deployed, they're easily scaled, and you can move them if the need in one area is reduced and the need somewhere else is increased. And the first one is dynamic line ratings. So you might be familiar with static line ratings, seasonal line ratings. As Commissioner Clements mentioned, ambient adjusted line ratings are now required by FERC Order 881. Dynamic line ratings go a step further and measure not only temperature, but wind speed and other factors to find the true capacity of transmission lines. And that can be very powerful. In this study that I've pulled from an Idaho National Lab summary, in 3 states, they found DLR exceeded the static line ratings by up to 36%. And then only some of the time, over 85% of the time, you're getting more capacity. I grew up in Oregon. We had a historic heat dome a few years ago, and in situations like that, where demand might be high, but the temperatures are also high, I think we really want to know what the true capacity of the line is. Advanced power flow control, you'll hear more about that from Frank on our panel soon, but these are devices that balance the flow of power over different circuits. And as you can see in the cartoon, if you can avoid an overload and push some power onto other lines, you could potentially add more renewables behind those circuits, and deployments in the UK by National Grid unlock capacity for 1.5 gigawatts more renewable energy, and saved a lot of money in production costs and also avoided other investments. And then finally, topology optimization is software that is the ways for the grid. It finds low-cost interventions that grid operators can take to redirect power, and in the case of this cartoon, address a curtailed wind farm and let it deliver more power. And in one study of topology optimization on historical conditions on the PJM system, they found a reduction in congestion costs by 50%, which is huge. Congestion costs in PJM last year were $2.5 billion. So why do we care about these technologies? I'm told the sound quality is better if I'm less excited, but that's really difficult for me. I'm going to do my best. Let's see. So GETS can double capacity for renewable energy in one study by the Brattle group looking at the Kansas and Oklahoma grids and the projects with signed interconnection agreements. GETS found twice as much capacity on the grid. The deployment paid for itself in 6 months. And as we've heard in the past few presentations, the need for transmission capacity is very urgent, and interconnection timelines are out of control, and the costs are killing projects. We also heard at the HVDC workshop this morning that lots of the critical supplies are back ordered. There's a long lead time for the traditional ways of increasing transmission capacity. And then if you're trying to build a new line, it takes years to site, permit, and finance, whereas my boss, Rob Gramick, would say plan, permit, and pay, the 3 Ps. Then the RTO congestion costs, as I mentioned, are growing very quickly in the past few years. We need more transmission capacity, and we need it yesterday. And then there's also a resilience and reliability benefit to GETS. You have more awareness of your system, you have more flexibility to use it differently. And then there are some examples here from another Brattle report, Building a Better Grid, on how dynamic line ratings, advanced power flow control, and topology optimization can help manage outages, for instance, and save tens of millions of dollars on a single outage in these examples. So GETS are going mainstream. Almost all of these announcements are from the year 2023. So this is happening in real time. MISO has a new process for grid users to identify reconfigurations that reduce congestion costs. MISO and the transmission owners will evaluate that solution, and if it shows net system benefits, they'll implement it. Sounds pretty common sense and useful, but this is brand new in June. And then SPP is also looking at a similar process, and also user-funded DLR implementations to decrease congestion. Again, comments are due October 31st. So like I said, this is happening right now. PPL won the 95th Edison Award for integrating DLR into the PJM market. FERC Order 881, which you've heard a bit about, and 2023 both advanced the cause of GETS, but there's more work to be done, clearly. And so what are the barriers, and why are we bringing this to you today? So based on 50% of hands raised, there's still a little bit of an awareness problem where utility executives, planners, regulators, other stakeholders don't understand. Maybe they've heard of the technologies, but do they understand the benefits? Do they understand the applications and the steps to operationalize them? That's what the speakers here will be talking about today. And then what is the incentive for utilities to innovate today? I'm sure you run into this every day. If you've done things well for 50 years the same way, why should you change and take on any risk? And then, of course, if you're lowering your capital expenditures by using cheaper technologies that maybe have some operations and maintenance costs, you have a perverse incentive not to take that route and to just build something big, even if it takes 10 years. So we're hoping to overcome these barriers today. We'll also have an opportunity for you all to share your thoughts on what the barriers are to get on that Slido poll. But I realized I didn't introduce myself. I'm Julian Selker. I'm the executive director of the WATT Coalition, working for advanced transmission technologies. And with that, I will pass it to Ken Donohoo, who leads the ESIG Gets User Group. Yep, take it away, Ken. Thanks. And you could use.
Either way. Very good attendance today. This looks good. And by the way, Ken Donohoo, been in the industry 42 years, primarily with ERCOT, also worked with Encore, and now I'm out doing independent consulting. And what's my role? Right now, I'm serving as a contractor to ESIG, under contract to DOE, to head up a GITS user group. Big key. And by the way, it was amazing how many people didn't know what GITS was. When I was calling all my friends and neighbors at the IOUs and the ISOs, a very large utility said, "What's GITS?" I had to spend half an hour explaining what it was. And this has been around for a while. Okay. I'm aging myself, back 42 years. This is the past. As a planner, I knew where my dispatchable generation was. I knew where my transmission was. I knew where my distribution was. I knew what my electric load was. And I had very good forecasters that gave me all those variabilities. That's the past. I want to make that very, very clear. The transition is now. It's not the past. But we've got a lot of things that are still from the past and a lot of critical thinking that is from the past that we've got to get around. And that's part of what we're doing with GITS. That's part of what we're trying to get over the hurdle. This is gone. Where are we today? This is our world now as a planner and as an operator. It's not about reserve margins. It's not about reliability metrics. It's about handling this animal, this beast that we're dealing with right now. And by the way, I got to thank ERCOT for this slide. They came up with a very nice slide. I stole it. So I give them credit. But we've got all these things happening at the same time. Planners are still focused on, I'm looking at the peak day. In ERCOT now, it's not the peak load is the issue. It's the early morning ramp and it's the evening ramp around solar and the wind farms. We've had a very interesting summer. Everything worked out well. Now we're also having a very interesting fall and winter. And we're looking at what's going to happen this year. There's a lot of concern about what's going to happen. But as planners, we haven't changed with what we're doing. We need to be looking at more at operational experiences, not based upon our summer peak load model. We don't even have models simulating these things right now. Operations is dealing with this minute by minute, hour by hour, and all these variabilities. In my neighborhood, we've got power walls, we got rooftop solar, we got a DER site. It's interesting talking to all these people and learning from them what their experience is. But this is what we got to start thinking about for the future. And the biggest thing of knowing what's going on the grid is more situational awareness, which is what gets you. Because before you do a lot of these technologies, the first thing you do is go out and look at your system. You have a lot more situational awareness. One of the biggest concerns I learned early on this thing was, how does NERC look at these things? How do we integrate these into planning? How do we integrate these in operation? But the biggest thing is, how do we get the NERC standards to recognize the transition that's going on? They are still in the past. Now, the GITS user group, it's an exclusive group. It's pretty private. We bring in vendors and present. We also have industry participants come in and present. It's a closed shop. We talk about things and try to come up with different ideas. We share information, what are our challenges, our practices, our benefits. And here's the big one, possible policy changes. I think right now that's what's blocking a lot of what we're doing. How do we encourage this at the same time, not penalize these folks? We're primarily made up from the US TDUs, our eligible for membership, and also ISOs. ERCOT's a member, MISO's a member, CalISO's a member. We've got a number of people parties, WECC, and so on. Here's the biggest one. Currently it's free. So why aren't the TDUs joining up more? That's my biggest issue I've got. They're busy, that's why. Everybody is resource constrained. I'm hearing it from everybody. I even heard it from the FERC guy. Everybody's resource constrained. Where we need to start prioritizing what's important. We got so many studies, so many analyses underway. How do we get that going? Most of our meetings are virtual. We're planning an in-person one late next year or early mid-year. We're looking at that. If you want to join, give me a card. I'll get you on the list. Or if you're a vendor, maybe we'll have you present in the future. Get with me at this meeting. If you want to join or drag your friends with you, you can go to the website or just send me an email. Here's our goal. We want to overcome some of the barriers that Julia was one of the first presenters at our meeting. We've held 2 meetings. The last one was very engaging about DLR. The next one is going to be about transmission optimization and reconfiguration. That is the hottest topic within the user group. So we got a lot going on. We got things going on at the MISO on reconfiguration and optimization. Same thing is happening right now in ERCOT, trying to get that implemented. Here's all the benefits. I know I'm not going to take their thunder, but a lot of it going through it. Here's my biggest concern. Why are TDUs not implementing it? Okay, we've all talked about the faster interconnection of load or generation. By the way, load's a big deal down in ERCOT right now. We've set 2 years of records. That was not in the planning model. Again, here's the other one that I don't think people are thinking about as a TDU. Could we use GITS to enhance or facilitate outages, whether it's generation outages or transmission outages? Could GITS help that world? Right now, it's a problem just trying to get the outages to construct and maintain our systems. Could this give you more information and help you with that? Again, get with your TDU neighbors. We need them to join and be more active. I want your friends. This has been a homework assignment in the user group. Now it's your assignment. Send them my email or get them on the website. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Ken. And I'll welcome Julian Leslie, Head of Networks at National Grid Electricity System Operator. Talk about the business case for GETS. I guess we just, yep, you can just press the down button.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Julian Leslie, Director of Networks and Chief Engineer for the Electricity System Operator over in Great Britain. I'd not heard the term GETS until Thursday when I was asked to do this presentation. However, just because I didn't know the term, it's not to say we're not using a lot of these technologies already. So just to put it in context, I work for the system operator in GB, currently only responsible for electricity system operation, soon to be taken out of National Grid, which is probably the name you all know, and to become part of a government-owned entity, where we'll have a responsibility for whole energy transformation to net zero. So far in GB, we've had 3 days this year at 90% zero carbon. So we're on track to meet our ambition in 2025 of having just a few small hours of zero carbon generation. So making great progress, but as you know, there is a lot to do, and GETS, the new term that I've learned, has a key role to play, because in the UK, it can take 14 years to build new transmission. We cannot wait that long because the generation wants to connect and needs to connect much sooner. In just a couple of short years ago, we'll be spending £3 to £4 billion on curtailment costs, which is all coming off the consumer's bills, of which we only have 30 million bill payers. So that's a lot of money per person that's having to fund these constraint costs. So we need to find ways in which we can manage those. Yes, the transmission infrastructure is coming. The infrastructure is coming, but we need to find quicker, more flexible deployment of solutions much more quickly. So we've always used automatic network management schemes. That's part and parcel of what we do every day. We've always used intertrip schemes, either commercial or non-commercial. And again, that's something we've used for many, many years. However, the 3 areas which I really want to focus on in the next few moments are the 3 there: the SmartWires product, using LiDAR to look at the rating on circuits, And then finally, what we're doing for dispatching distributed generation to manage transmission constraints. I should also say we also use Pablo's exercise software as well to optimize the power flows on the network. And we do that, and we do that every day and all day. But I really want to talk about these three here because they're new. So the Smart Wires product, we're going to hear a little bit more about the detail from the vendor, but from our perspective as a system operator, this is changing sort of the laws of physics on the transmission line. So actually you can, using these voltage source converter devices, either increase or decrease the resistance and reactance to the line, so you can change and alter the power flows, so you can change the laws of physics as how the power would flow. At the moment, they've just been installed, so at the moment we're using them in a post-fault situation. So we have a fault on the system, there's an overload on the network, and we then instruct the Smart Wires device to then remove that overload and share the power flow on the other more lightly loaded circuits nearby. We've installed them at 3 of the key locations. We have a lot of wind in Scotland, which is the north of this map here. And we've got a constraint boundary in the north of England, where those 3 yellow dots are. And we're trying to get the power across that and optimize it. And that is our biggest constraint boundary in GB. What we want to do is when we get the 3 of these installed and working effectively, is working with Smart Wires, get some software that helps us to optimize the pre and post fault flows across those key major AC circuits flowing from north to south, so we can maximize the power flow. But these things, if you're spending £2 or £3 billion a year on a constraint boundary, these things pay for themselves in a very, very short turnaround period. And the way that our incentives work in GB is that the transmission owner gets paid for the capacity they add to the system. So rather than building a new circuit, they build Smart Wires, but their revenue and their income is still the same. Dynamic line rating. We trialed this as National Grid in the northeast of the US, and we saw that there was a 31% enhancement on the rating. So we've adapted this and moved it over to the UK as well, and we're picking circuits in the UK in which we can apply this. This is a very low cost solution. And again, very quickly, its payback period is in months, not years, not tens of years, but the payback period is in months. The challenge with this is how do you get that dynamic line rating to feed into the energy management systems in the control room and feed into the market system set in the UK, so that your boundary flows that we're curtailing the market or running the market on are updated on a dynamic basis as we get the increased rating. And there's a win-win here, right? Because in the UK, most of our renewables are wind. We have a lot of solar, but the most of them are wind in Scotland. So when it's windy, guess what? The cooling on the circuit is its greatest, so you get the maximum power flow. So these things start to work together, and just at the time you need an enhanced rating, that's the time the DLR can give you it. So we're really excited. We're trialing on one circuit now, but I'm really excited that this is a solution we should just be deploying everywhere. Why wouldn't you? And then the final one, we're just going live with this. So historically, the distributed energy resources, unless they paid a lot of money and wanted to be bound by the rules of the GB energy market and the balancing mechanism, the distributed energy resources, they sold their power locally. They sold it through power purchase agreements. But we had no visibility in the national control room. We had no ability to dispatch or curtail their output. We've invested heavily in working with the DNOs, the distribution network operators, integrating their power flow systems with ours, integrating the market solutions so that when we have a curtailment of transmission, we can call on that solar farm, that distributed battery, that distributed wind energy resource, and say, hey, can you help? And through that process, we're also allowing the distribution network operators to introduce flexibility markets into managing their own network. So they now have the tools, the market structures in which they can manage a very local constraint, but also help us as a national level manage a transmission constraint. But again, it's really thinking about how you could integrate these systems, these services, and these products so that actually we can get a lower cost solution for everybody, which enhances the amount of renewable generation we can connect in the first place. Just this example here, this is just in the very southwest corner of GB in South Wales, 7.5 gigawatts of additional capacity, just by linking 2 IEMS systems together and putting some market rules in place. And don't get me wrong, it took a long time and it was challenging, but now we're there. we're about to go live with this product, and it's going to be a game changer, I think, in the cost of operating the system, but also our ability to get more renewable generation connected to the distribution system and helping to solve those national transmission problems. So that was all I wanted to say. So just a few examples of how we're using GETS, I can use that term now, to really maximize the power flows and really utilize the existing assets, which have huge capacity on them. Because they're built, so in our case, they were built by the government in the 50s and 60s, and we were very fortunate to be left with a legacy of a very robust system. And now by the use of GETS, we can leverage that additional capacity and capability with the modern technology, knowing how now steel, how it can really, the weight bearingness of steel, the power flow through a conductor that we didn't know 40, 50 years ago when they were constructed. Now we know, and with LiDAR and other things, we can really extract that additional power from the existing network and really make a huge difference. So thank you.
Thank you, Julian. I'm sure everyone is still reeling from the idea that a transmission owner could be compensated based on the amount of capacity that they add instead of the cost of service. But I'm going to hand it over to Brian Barry, the Chief Product Officer for Ampacimon, to start our deep dives into the different technologies before Q&A. So please prepare your questions while we go through these.
Yeah, thank you very much. So my name's Brian Barry from Ampacimon, and I'm going to talk specifically about dynamic line rating, which was touched on the previous presentations. So Ampacimon are producers of this dynamic line rating system, but there are many competitors as well, and I'll try to keep it vendor agnostic and talk more around the benefits that are available from such a system. So I'll talk a little bit about what is DLR. I mean, we've touched on it, but more why DLR, why do we want it? Then I'll talk about some of the implementation hurdles. In reality, it's a very short presentation, so I can only give you a taster. I encourage you guys to come chat to myself or any of the people in the panel. We'll be here most of the week. So come ask us questions, happy to answer them. And I'll talk about some case studies, time permitting. So what's DLR? So basically, an overhead line has two energy inputs. So you either have current heating up the line or you have solar heating from the sun. You then have cooling energy from the wind or from ambient temperature, which creates radiative cooling. Now, in terms of our typical system, we would just use boilerplate values. So we would take the worst case weather and assume that that is the rating for all time. What dynamic line rating does is we consider the real-time weather of the system. And this gives us extra capacity because if we have cooling from the wind or if we have cooling because the sun's not shining, we can push more power through the lines. So just to get some numbers behind this, we've got ambient temperature. If we were to have a 1 degree Celsius change, that's about a 1% change in capacity. So 10 degrees Celsius, around about 10% capacity change. The sun, so middle of the night with no sun versus the day, you can get about 18% capacity. And then the game changer is wind. So if we look at the bottom of this table here, wind with a 3 feet per second change of wind at a 90-degree angle, you can get up to 40% extra capacity through your line. Now, when we think about wind, we think, oh, yeah, gust of wind. 3 feet per second for the guys in metric, 1 meter per second roundabout. It's on a clear day, if I were to walk, I'll walk at about 1 meter per second. It's not a huge gust of wind. It's a very small amount of wind, but it can give you 40% extra capacity. So this is significant, okay? But the problem is we don't know what the weather is directly on the line. It's difficult to get a hold of that. So that's why we haven't been using it in our typical design. But with GETS, we have sensors, we have technology, we have software. So we are able to understand what the weather is on the line, and we can use that. So what we have is your traditional approach starting at the top, static line rating, that's your boilerplate. Fine. Then you have seasonal adjusted rating. So you can assume in winter it's colder than in summer. So you can get a little bit more extra capacity in the middle of winter. Great. That's seasonal adjusted rating. Then we get into ambient adjusted rating, which is what FERC 881 requires. And that's just considering the ambient temperature that I showed you. So 1 degree Celsius, 1% change in capacity. And then lastly, you get dynamic line rating, which considers the wind as well and gets you a lot more gain, up to 40% gain on your lines. So looking at this statistically, this is kind of what it shows you. So if I were to look at the gains on the y-axis versus the percentage of time, you can see that your static rating is fixed all throughout the time. And then you have your different ratings based on ambient temperature, which is the light blue, your forecasted rating, and then dynamic line rating. So you can get up to, I mean, in this particular case, a small percentage of the time, up to double the capacity of the line under certain conditions. Talking about some of the implementation hurdles, especially looking at the conversations this morning, I know we're technical people, a lot of us like to talk about the science, but in reality, the hurdles are largely financial and systematic. So on the technical side, you know, we need to trust the science. We need to have lab tests. We need to have field tests, standards, all of these things. In reality, we have this. DLR is not a new technology. It's been around since the 90s, to be honest. There's standards, lab tests. There's even competition. You know, you don't need, there's not only one vendor. You can buy from multiple vendors. The problems are more on systematic process. So when I have this data, and Julian even mentioned this in the UK, how do I bring it into my system? How do I bring it into the market? There are solutions for this. You know, we've got to consider cybersecurity. We've got to consider data connections, etc. We've got a few customers around the world that have already taken these steps. I'll talk about them in the next few slides. But yeah, we've got to bring those data into our system. And I must commend FERC 881 really takes a large step in that direction, because it forces utilities around the US to build the systems to bring this data in to the market. But the last one is financial. So what we find is the people who benefit from these constraint management systems are not the people that pay. In the case of the UK, they've got a system that really helps to incentivize this. But in a lot of the cases, constraint payments are passed all the way down to the consumer. I feel if we were to flip this around, we would find solutions to these other hurdles, okay? Easier said than done. This takes time. So to make it real, here's an example from PPL, our flagship customer within the US. They put DLR on a few lines, but this is one study they did where they considered traditional methodologies of reconductoring or rebuilding a new line. You can see their time to implement, 2 to 5 years if they were to reconductor or rebuild, and you can see the costs associated. 0.5 million per mile on reconductoring, with a 34% increase of capacity. And similarly, dynamic line rating, you have an implementation timeline of less than a year and less than 1 million cost for a similar order of magnitude of gain, 10 to 30%. Just to kind of make it real, there you can see a picture of the sensor. So this is the sensor that's mounted on the line. It's measuring the real-time conditions on the line, and that gives extra capacity. In this particular case, they did a study and they showed that one DLR system on one line was able to save $23 million of congestion costs from that one line. I always like to say, if you look at their smiling faces, it's very clear that the system works, you know, they wouldn't be smiling otherwise, right? A few other examples. I don't know if we have time, a little bit of time. Okay, so Elia in Belgium, very similar problem. You go around the world, the electricity system stays the same. Market incentives, very different, but Ohm's law still holds. Here they've got flows through Belgium, which are constrained. They found that by putting DLR, they were able to get an extra 30% capacity on their 380 kV lines. One of the examples they have is this saved €500,000 of international redispatch in 1 day. So if you're talking about repayments here, we're not talking about repayments of years. We're talking about repayments of, in this case, minutes, okay? Not even months, okay? It's about trying to align the incentives with the solution. I really like this example. It's really cool. Not every example is like this, but essentially there was a ski resort in the Alps in France where they wanted to build a ski resort. And they found out that basically they only ever use the power in the middle of winter. Nice. DLR works the best in winter when it's cold. So they found out instead of having to build a line to host this new ski resort, they could basically put DLR on the line. And because the load was only there in winter, they got away without having to build a line, but were able to connect the load. Really cool example. I understand some of us want to connect a load in the middle of summer, and that's a different story. Last one, wind in feed case in Belgium. Obviously, DLR makes a lot of sense with wind because you get your highest generation when the wind's blowing, but you also get your highest gain of DLR when the wind's blowing. So over here, we installed DLR on a wind in feed line, and we're able to get 20% extra capacity 90% of the time at low wind speeds, so less than 5 meters per second. And this increases the investment case. So financially, it makes more sense to the developers, but also unblocks the queue and gets more into the grid, especially in cases like in the Netherlands, where they're at a point where the grid cannot accept any more connections. So fundamentally, they've hit the max. If they don't build more lines or they don't get extra capacity from somewhere, they're not going to get any more renewables. So this is just one system in their toolbox that they can use. All right, I'll leave it there.
Awesome. Thank you. And I see some questions coming in from Slido and they're getting voted on. So please keep contributing. Welcome, Dr. Pablo Ruiz, who's the CEO, CTO of NewGrid Inc., and also senior consultant at Brattle, talking about topology optimization.
Thank you, Julia, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and give you an update on the work on topology optimization to improve congestion management and get more out of the grid this afternoon. So this is a second and highly complementary technology to DLR, also highly complementary to power flow control. This afternoon, we'll talk a little bit about the background on both congestion management and the technology itself, say a few words about integration into utility processes. And most of the time, we'll talk about a pilot that we did with a partner utility in the SPP footprint. SPP is the system and market operator in the Great Plains in the US, where as part of the pilot, we were verified exposed. Using reconfigurations, the partner utility was able to release 845 megawatts of generation during an extreme event. So similar to those that Commissioner Clements mentioned earlier. So very exciting updates, and also a different type of metric than usually you would think about when you discuss GETs. So in terms of congestion management, the traditional approach or the legacy approach is to treat the grid as exogenous or fixed, or at least not as a decision variable, and rely mostly on a redispatch. In other words, reduce dispatch upstream of a constraint and increase generation downstream. This would be the equivalent of increasing the tolls in a highway, such that enough people decide to not drive until there are no lines on the toll booths. So if you, with that picture in mind, it's easy to see why the cost of managing congestion can be so significant, as Julia and Julian mentioned for both the US and the UK. Now, the implications are not only in terms of production costs, they are also in terms of decreased reliability, decreased resilience, and we'll touch on those as well. Few words about the topology optimization itself. It's a software technology that enables flexible grid operation by finding reconfigurations to reroute flow around bottlenecks. These reconfigurations are implementable today, so they rely on existing equipment, both for switching as well as for communications, and they are reliable. They account for the entire list of contingencies that the operators need to maintain during their day-to-day operations. Of course, reconfigurations are not new. They have been used since the inception of the transmission system. The innovation is in the quick identification of the reconfiguration so that the operators don't need to rely exclusively on their experience, and rather they can use a decision support tool that provides a comprehensive and fast review of the options available for them to then consider in whatever process that they are working on. So this is a tool to support pretty much any project, any process, decision-making process that deals with congestion management or with transmission limitations. You know, they can span from planning to operations. Of course, the longer timeframe processes have a simpler type of integration. You know, no integration is required. The closer to get to real time, you know, the more integration with the other systems is required, you know, with EMS or the market management systems. It's also always a good practice to start simpler and then go into the more complex implementations. Julia mentioned the process in MISO, whereby market participants can request reconfigurations that they identified to bottlenecks that are extended in duration or to address expected congestion patterns. That would be step number one. You know, other processes include supporting operations planning, you know, outage coordination, and things like that before you you deploy the technology in real time, where clearly most of the benefits would be, but you can start learning, getting acquainted, and getting benefits from a slower timescale type of use. The rest of the presentation, I'll discuss results from the pilot with the partner utility in SPP. In this pilot, we focus on 10 significant constraints that were very difficult to control. They were expensive to control. We jointly worked on or identified reconfigurations to mitigate those 10. And by the way, not every constraint has a solution in terms of reconfiguration, but in this case, most of them did. They discussed with the system operators. Some of those options were used, some were not, in part due to the lack of processes. And that's one of the challenges in some areas to leverage these opportunities. And we evaluated ex post the impacts using highly detailed state estimator cases on what happened, and those we'll be discussing next. First, from a reliability point of view, if we concentrate on the for those 10 constraints of focus, if we use the reliability metric as the number of constraints hours with an overload risk, these are N-1 overload risk, the reduction again measured ex post with the proper reconfiguration is 98%. Most of these opportunities were leveraged. On the left-hand side, you see a bar chart. The section of the bars in blue, those are the benefits that were actually achieved with implementations. The sections in orange were the opportunities that were foregone. Where the opportunities were there, system operators did not use, in part due to lack of process. Overall, summing the two, 98%, very significant impacts. Now looking at the congestion costs of these 10 constraints plus constraints nearby. The potential reduction in the cost of managing congestion in the area is 85%. Now in this case, 23%, a significant number, $14 million over 5 months, were achieved during those 5 months that we are describing. Most of them were not, 62%, again, in part due to a lack of processes. That's what we're working on now. But overall, 85% or 53 million, this is for a single, very large, but single SPP utility member. And the last example I wanted to mention is one related to an extreme event. So the previous two, those 5 months, had some challenging hours, but they were challenging, but within normal conditions. In December of last year, there was a winter storm Elliott. A number of system operators in the Eastern Interconnection had to shed load. Pretty much all of them declared emergency conditions. SPP, in this case, declared emergency conditions. At the time, 3 of the 10 constraints that we had worked on were binding, some were overloading. We looked at those 3 that are shown in the diagram. They feed a major load pocket. And we investigated further, again, exposed 2 of the reconfigurations we had evaluating were implemented, and they enabled a release of 845 megawatts of generation that was available under these very, very tight conditions that would have been stranded behind the bottleneck, but for those 2 reconfigurations. And there were additional opportunities that were missed, in part due to the lack of processes that would have released another 600 megawatts of generation during EEI conditions. So we were quite excited about this study, looking at a different angle of the benefits of GETS, and looking forward to the discussion in Q&A.
Pablo, do a little switcheroo here. And then we'll have Frank Kreikebaum from SmartWires. He's the co-CTO to present about advanced power flow control. Pull up the right presentation. Oh, Brian, SOS, thank you. Thank you for all the questions. They're coming in. Folks are voting on them. This will be a direct democracy, so don't miss your opportunity to decide what we discuss. We should have about half an hour of questions, so plenty of time to dig in.
Good afternoon, all. Thanks for having me here today. Thank you for the introduction. I haven't been in person here since this meeting in 2019, so it's exciting to see how much bigger this room has gotten. Did have a chance to go virtual a couple times, but it's great to be back in person. SmartWires has had a very eclectic journey over the last 13 years, made a lot of progress, but clearly lots of challenges in this world, and glad to have a number of other vendors with us pursuing the GETS arena and topic. Just a quick synopsis of where power flow control has been over time. First power flow controllers were deployed in 1920s. They were typically fixed inductors or fixed capacitors, and in the 1950s we added phase shifting transformers, or as Julian probably calls them, QBs. And as PJM would call them, phase angle regulators, but we added these capabilities. They, with switches, have the ability to respond in time, but they tend to be fairly large chunks, so not very granular, and also relatively slow to respond. In the 90s, both ABB and Westinghouse deployed power electronic-based power flow controllers. These were done largely as proof of concept type projects. And then starting in 2016, SmartWires deployed what we call the modular SSSC. Effectively, each of those boxes that you see on the right-hand image is a self-contained power flow controller rated for 10 MBAR. And so you can scale the number of devices that you deploy based on your need at any time. They respond, like most power electronics, to control signals on the order of milliseconds or microseconds, depending on the event that we're trying to accommodate. And we've been deploying these for a number of years now. Just to give you an update on what's happened since I stood before you 4 years ago, at the time we had 159 megawatts of capacity unlocked across all of our customers globally. We stand today at 3.5 gigawatts unlocked, so about 20 times improvement in in those 4 years. On the customer savings side, which is really driven by congestion, we were at 11 million, we went to 1.6 billion, so roughly 20x there. And that's directly related to the number of MVAR or gigavar that we've deployed is also 20x. So we've been busy. What we will notice from the map on the right, though, is that most of our activity for commercial projects is in Europe, Australia, and Latin America. We do have projects in the US. However, they are primarily pilot in nature, and that's changing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So this is coming back to some things Julian mentioned. In 2021, National Grid Electricity Transmission and GET in the UK deployed our devices on 5 circuits at 3 sites. And the initial deployment you see on the left-hand side, this is just showing 2 of the circuits, was done in such a way that they could add devices if the need increased. And they expected the need to increase because, as Julian indicated, that's the most congested boundary in the GB system. So after the installation was completed, a year later, they said, yep, we have some additional constraint. We'd like to add devices. And they added a number of devices to resolve that incremental constraint. They could have just as easily removed devices and moved them elsewhere, which is part of the excitement that people have about the solution. That lead time for all these projects was 2 years. We're working to reduce that so we can deploy in less than a year. And the main reason that they chose us over other solutions was that the NPV is so much higher because we can deliver so much more quickly than some of the other solutions. So that's a good segue to some of the trends that we're seeing, especially this year, around GETs and why GETs are becoming increasingly critical to the transition. So this is a graph that came from BNEF. Effectively, they're showing how much metal do you need for different ampacity solutions as a function per meter. And you'll see on the left-hand side is all the overhead line stuff. So overhead lines really efficient in terms of the amount of metal you need to get an additional meter of capacity. As you move to the right on the graph, underground cables and submarine cables, you pick up orders of magnitude more metallic requirement. And the challenge for this is twofold. One is most of the permitting is so difficult that people are going to underground or they're going to subsea cables. So you're being pushed to the right by the public. At the same time, you've got entities like Bloomberg saying, well, we need to double the size of the grid between now and 2050 to hit net zero. So what that's going to do is it's going to drive a lot of demand. Even if we stayed with overhead lines, it's going to drive a lot of demand on the supply chain to push out a lot more capacity than we've been doing for the last few decades. So this is pointing to, and this is courtesy of Brian pointed us to this, is really pushing to, we need to be really efficient with the corridors that we have because we're probably not going to be able to deploy as much new metal in the air or the ground as we'd like to. And then this next image is based in part on IEA's work and also in part on some internal data that we have within SmartWires. And we're looking at typical deployment times for different solutions across these 3 regions. And what we mean by typical here is plus minus 1 standard deviation from the mean. So you've got solutions out there that can increase ampacity significantly. The challenge is the timelines involved. So many of these are 10 years out. HVDC in the best case is 6 years once you include permitting and contracting and all this stuff. We now have a disconnect between our here to 2030 goals and what we can realistically implement with solutions like this. And that's where GETS really steps in to have a say. I think we all are going to agree we're going to get more out of our existing corridors. We're going to have to put more metal into those corridors and increase ampacity. But the challenge is really the next 5-7 years of how do we get as much out of those corridors as we can while we're waiting for the supply chain to build up. The beauty of something like Pablo's solution, some of the work that Tapestry is doing and others are doing, and then as we move to DLR is we're talking about very resource non-intensive solutions, in some cases literally no resource from a hardware perspective. And you're able to deploy in months to year rather than these lead times you see here. So it's a great opportunity to complement what we need to do from a ampacity perspective with the network we already have. If you look at what was happening in the US, and this is part of our excitement about the US market at the moment, we heard about Order 2023 earlier. That's already driven a lot of activity where utilities are being required and planners are being required to look at what is called alternative transmission technologies. And you'll see a number of different types of fax devices, transmission switching, all those things are part of that. They're required to look at that as part of interconnection planning and then report on what the findings were in terms of time, in terms of cost relative to other solutions. And then the IIJA, which was passed last year in the US, led to funding for grid investment, and the first round of those projects for grid investments were released last week by the GDO at DOE. And as an example, there's $60 million of cost share that DOE is providing for smart wires projects. And there's a whole bunch of other GETs that are being supported by these programs. And this is just 1 year of a multi-year process where they're going to be looking at how do we do cost share with utilities to help them become more comfortable with these technologies more quickly. From a modeling side, this is a huge piece. And if you were here in 2019 and remember anything from that, this was what I was talking about then. I'm still talking about modeling. We've made a lot of progress on the planning side. So we've either worked with software developers themselves to create native models, or for the most part, we've created user-defined models. All the platforms you see on the right have either a native model or a user-defined model available for most of the planning functionality. The small pieces we're missing on the planning side is around the production cost space. We are still challenged on the operational side. We have a lot of work to do on the operational side, and we are keen to partner with anyone out there who is interested in helping advance the modeling of these solutions on the operations side. And if you would like any copies of these models, feel free to reach out to this email address. So finally, ESIG has made a lot of progress on the integration. I think well before the phrase energy transition was known broadly, Charlie and crew were proposing and advancing this theme. I think the big piece now is how do we resolve the next tranche of challenges? And from my seat, what I see is that this GITS user group is key, that Ken is leading, is really key to get us over this 5-year hump. Make sure we leverage what we have in the system so that the large solutions can, number one, be ready to support and build up the supply chain for them. But also because of the sensitivity around customer willingness to pay to the cost of the energy transition, we will lose the consumer confidence along the way if we don't make sure that those new investments are also well utilized. So it's in our interest from a consumer willingness to pay perspective, from a supply chain perspective, and from my perspective, the most important part, the climate perspective, to make sure we position the globe well for the 2030 and beyond horizon by getting through this near-term constraint that we have using the GETS services. So thank you.